Well, in the essence of time, let's go ahead and get started, Leanne, and
All right.
then we can start on time, end on time.
Okay. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday, the middle of the week. Um, just want to say welcome, and we're glad that you guys are here. Um, First, I have to do my disclaimer, make sure it's okay with you that you're being recorded, because these do go into our member portal for viewing later. So we just recently learned that we have to put that out there. So anyway, with that, we're going to have a good discussion tonight. It's a intense education and information that Scott and Robin are offering. So pay attention and you'll be tested later. No, I'm just kidding. All right. You guys enjoy the presentation. And if you have any questions, you can certainly raise your hand. It's under reactions down there, or you can just put it in the chat and I will happily read it for you. Okay. Robin, it's yours.
All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Happy to see you here on this Wednesday. It's a Wednesday afternoon / evening for us. From wherever you are. We had somebody on, was it last night from Australia? So he got the time kind of mixed up a little bit and came on a little bit late, but we did get him on here. But Australia is actually building tiny houses, guys. That's kind of cool. They're about 5 years behind the U.S. In just about everything. They like follow us a little bit, so it's kind of cool they're at a stage that the tiny house industry was about 5 years ago, but they're starting to have their shows and that kind of thing. So it's cool. All right, well, Scott, you want to say hi and give us a Reader's Digest thumbnail sketch of who you are, and then we'll dive right into it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's call. Excuse me. Been a developer in Orlando since 1983. I've permitted a lot of projects, and we're started a company to build tiny home neighborhoods. And so as an update, we had a big meeting with Volusia County a week ago Friday. So the Friday before Thanksgiving. And the site that we had under contract, they didn't like so much. They thought we'd have a hard time getting it permitted through the counties. But in lieu of that, they suggested a site that they own that they would really like to see us do. And there's a contemplation that they may actually give us the land. We told them we would give them $1 for our program is to sell our units. And so we told them that we would give them $1 for dollar credit. So if they gave us, let's say, $15,000 in land costs, we would reduce our sales price by the $15,000, and any additional funds that come in either in grants or in impact fee credits or any other dollar amounts that come in to support the project, we would give $1 for dollar credit to try to make it more affordable. So
wow,
that's what we're doing. So we're actively involved right now in our first deal. We're looking for land for the second and third deal. We're now up to over 200,000 raised to get going on the first deal and the second deal. So we're real excited.
So, and the lesson here, guys, I mean, this is real world stuff that we're talking about. And the lesson here is, you may not be able to build on your original parcel that you looked at, but just the fact that you're in there, you're in the mix, you're talking to the people, you're networking with the people in the building and the zoning and the planning commission, the commissioners and that kind of stuff. They may come in and pop in and say, hey, we don't like this land, but we've got this other one over here. Really good job, Scott. Kudos. So if you guys agree, make sure you put something in the chat to say good job, because I think it was a good job.
Definitely.
Getting that through.
Kind of as a further thing, just for some of you that are newer to our meeting here, we've been working closely with the county, and Volusia County passed a very, very comprehensive program for affordable housing, and they included some items in there that we have in Florida. One is House Bill 1339 that allows local government to override the existing zoning on a piece of property. And that's what we're going to end up doing on the second piece that I just mentioned that the county may actually give us. So that it's pretty exciting that they're going to build all this into one program and let us be a demonstration project for the affordable housing tiny home neighborhoods.
Wow, good
We
job.
need more of those.
Yeah. So anyway, this is what we're doing on Wednesday nights is real world stuff, but we also have a lot of education and theory. So the first Monday that we got, or Wednesday we got together, Scott kind of went over his project. So if you want to go back and check that out, that's available. And I thought if it's all right with everyone that I would take 5 minutes and we would kind of review the past few weeks and bring us up to speed with where we are tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And the first day we were just basically doing a 20,000 foot overview, developing tiny house communities, developing your dreams. We talk about location and the types of tiny houses. That was the first one. And then the second one, and I'm going to go through this real fast so that we can get into today's topic. Then we talked about, designing your development. What are you near? What are your discretionary items? We talked about some research and some concept plans. And then day 4, we talked about the team. Who do you have to have on your team to, the attorneys, the civil engineers, the real estate agents, all of that's in there, your surveyor, your land planners. And so that's going to be in that day that we did. And then we actually took 2 days, I think, on day 5, because there was just so much. We kind of spent the first 3 kind of 20,000 feet. And now we were getting down and dirty into getting to the starting line. In other words, there's a lot of preliminary work that you have to do, just like Scott. Scott, how long were you working on the project before you actually got before well, I guess it was a board of commissioners or something that you were before in Volusia County? How long have you been working on trying to find some land or a project?
We put it under contract in, in April. So it took us this long. And part of that was the county staff advised us in September to wait. They had 6 of their 7 commissioners were coming up for re-election or election. And so they said, nobody's going to approve anything in October, in September and October. So we just kind of sat on the sidelines and waited. And that's why we went and had the big meeting right after, we got scheduled as fast as we could after the election so that they know who's coming in and then who's going to be in January. So in Volusia County, as I think most places, the commissioners are elected in November and they take office in January. They said the first January meeting is a kumbaya meeting. They're all going to sit around the fireplace, hold hands, eat s'mores, and get to know each other. And then so they said pretty much no business will happen then. The second meeting, county commissions usually meet twice a month. Second meeting in January will be more of the same, and then they'll start getting into actually doing something in February. So we're back on schedule to have that going. So working with the county on their piece, and there's a couple other pieces that are adjacent that I'm about to put under contract, and then make it slightly bigger, and then we'll go into concept planning again. We can talk about that in a little while.
Absolutely. So yeah, so what the message is, it takes time, and from the time you start, you locate a property until you actually start getting paid, start selling units, it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some money. And for all of that time, your down payment, your payments to the subcontractors and the civil engineer and all that needs to get covered somehow. So we're going to talk about, in a future session, we're going to talk about the financials and how we can fund a project like this with some investors and that kind of thing. But today, I mean, this was still a review. We went over contracts. We spent a lot of time with real estate agent contracts and different types of contracts and contracts for deed and purchase and sale agreements and options and things like that. Then we're going to go into some due diligence. We'll get into that some today. And then we probably won't get into permits, but this is kind of an overview. We talked about the entitlement consultant, some financials, then the insurance agent, the types of construction. There's horizontal and vertical construction. Horizontal is horizontal, the land, the roads, all of your water lines, sewer lines, and things like that. Your vertical construction is what's built on it and goes up from there. So if you're building a tiny house community that's only has pedestals, then you really only have horizontal, and then people bring in their units. That's the vertical part of it, kind of like Lake Dallas, Texas, and Terry Lathrop, what he did there. Then we talked about raw land, doing your research, the real estate agent and the team and the people you need to get to where you have your contract. And then these are all the different types. And we talked a little bit about putting cash down, letter of intent, and option. So and the red flags, and we're going to go over the red flags again real quick, but that's kind of a review. So before I go on, is there anybody that's totally lost or has any questions? And then if not, we'll go into today's presentation. But anybody have any questions for Scott or myself regarding the what we've already gone over in the past? All right. Well, if not, then let's get started. Let's get this party started. All right. We looked at this one last week. Scott, do you want to kind of give us a review over the different types of agreements that we have here? Just a quick review.
Sure. Most of the deals that we're going to end up doing when we're buying land to put any kind of development on is really an option of contract. We have a purchase and sale agreement, but basically it's at our option to move forward. So we usually have a due diligence period in there so we can learn about utilities and if there's any issues on the property and what the zoning is, and what our chances of getting rezoned if we have to rezone, and do you have a future land use component that needs to be changed or whatever. So typically what happens in this is that we would like to have as little money at risk at the very beginning as possible, and certainly all of it coming back, none of it being at risk until the end of our due diligence period. So we usually do what they call waterfall events. So we'll go through and we'll have maybe a very small deposit, let's say $5,000, $1,000 to $5,000. This last deal that I had just had $1,000 up. And then after we would go through, let's say, a 90-day due diligence period to see that, what the wetlands were and, utilities and things that we can find out without going through too much of the government process. And at that point, we may put up, let's say, another 4,000 deposit, and then we would be at risk for 5. Then let's say we get the zoning done, we might put up another 20. And at that point, the 25 total deposit after it's zoned would be at risk, subject to seller being able to deliver clean and marketable title to us at the closing.
And depending upon what part of the country you're in, I have talked with a developer in California, and he says it's not unusual to have 100 to 300,000 at risk before you before you actually close. So the numbers, Scott's really good at it. He's been doing it a long time. He's a great negotiator. So he's good at keeping the upfront costs very low. But just so you know, that's to me, that sounds fantastic. If all you have at risk on a what is it? How many units is this project here? 22 units?
22, yeah.
22 unit project.
but to further that is we typically on most of the deals that we get involved in, the sellers don't have surveys and don't really have anything. They just bought the property, and a lot of them have been holding it for 5, 10, 20 years or whatever. So what we do is, what in part of our contract negotiations is we say, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, the reason we're putting such a low deposit down is if we were to terminate the agreement and walk away, we will give you all our work product at our cost. So typically you have to go out and get a survey. I think that's on the next couple of slides, but so we'll go through that, but we're going to have money at risk, if you will. Our whole deal on the 22 units, we have budgeted $100,000 to spend in costs primarily before we close.
Okay, all right. So that's not a bad number, 100 to 300,000, depending on the size. And the other thing to remind everybody, 22 units is probably too small, according to Scott. Now he thinks 40 to 60 is a better starting unit, and it's the same amount of work, just a little more money. And so if you're raising funds, the profitability and it's easier to get angel investors or investors involved if the return on investment is a little bit higher, and you get up to the 40 to 60, the ROI gets better on it because you're spreading the costs over more units. So you said option, but before we do an option, don't we do an LOI?
Well, we could do an LOI in the bigger deals. Like I'm getting ready between now and Monday, I'm going to write an LOI on another piece of property that we're looking at for a mixed use deal. Part of what I do is some bigger deals too. And so the letter of intent would be, usually it's a 2-page thing, lists out who the buyer and seller are and the general terms that you're looking at. Rather than get attorneys involved, which we typically don't, although some sellers will want to go to an attorney. So what we try to do is use the LOI, letter of intent, to put out the deal terms so that everybody's in general agreement. So I'm going to pay, $350,000, and I'm going to put $1,000 down, and after 90 days, I'm going to put another $4,000 down, and then after the rezoning, I'm going to put another $20,000 down, and at that point, the entire 25 is at risk. You're going to provide me anything that you have in terms of surveys, any environmental issues, et cetera. You're going to sign a seller's authorization form for my city or county, and then a general one for me to go to state agencies on. When you're upfront doing your contract in the letter of intent, everybody's all happy. And after you've been 5 or 6 months into a process that's taking longer than everybody thought it was going to take, let's say, it may not be so happy. So you need to, anything you want to get signed, you want to get signed up front while everybody's in kumbaya mode.
Yeah. So when you said at risk, some people call it going hard when their money goes hard. Is there a time when the money is not at risk?
Yeah, during our due diligence period, that $1,000 and then the $5,000 typically would be subject to, in many of our cases, we have to rezone the property in most cases. So in any case that I would have to rezone, I would want to have the deposit refundable if we cannot get the zoning. Sometimes you're going to get involved in a property that's already zoned, so it becomes more technical in nature because you don't have, the neighbors can't bitch and complain that not my backyard people, et cetera, go away when you don't have to do either a zoning or a future land use change.
There you go. All right.
So those deals are typically much quicker, much faster.
So now that we've gotten the land, is this the next step, or do you have a step before this one, Scott?
We typically, once we have the land under contract, I typically will look at some very preliminary due diligence items before I get too excited about the contract. So in most of the deals that we're going to do, we have to have public utilities. So it's an easy call in Florida generally to call to pick up um, your parcel ID number from the property appraiser, and then call the utility department and say, here's the property, and you rattle off the parcel ID number, and then they'll look at and they'll say, oh, you have a sewer line here and a water line here, and or they're close, and then you can look at how close they are versus the cost of extending them. And sometimes, like if the water and sewer are half a mile away, you most likely will look for a different piece of property, because the cost to bring that to the site, especially for a small number of units, is very cost prohibitive. The other thing is you have to look at the lift station. We have lift station, which is where all the wastewater from your house, the sinks, the toilets, showers, etc., all go to a collection point, and they either flow by gravity to a spot, and then if the county has what they call a force main, you need to have a lift station to get the force of the effluent to get into the system that the county already has. Here, our lift stations generally cost in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $300,000. So, and it doesn't. And if you get, let's say, over 100 units, it may go up 20 grand or something like that, but it's disproportionate. So for the first 50 to 100 units, you're going to be spending 250 to 300 here. So that's a good number to know that you have to pay up front before you get too excited about spending a whole lot of money on the deal.
So that's one part of your due diligence, and then there's also sometimes the State Road Commission will ask you to do something for your entranceway. You might have to put in some curbs, some sidewalks, and things like that. Is that another consideration that you'd have to factor in when you're thinking of the project?
We generally here, and just about all the projects we'll be involved in, are going to have to put sidewalks at least in front of the property. And if you're on 3 streets, you may have to put sidewalks on 3 sides. But that's another easy call. Typically, when you call the planning department for your zoning, I always call and get what is the current zoning and the current future land use. In Florida, those two have to match in order for you to move forward. You have to change one or the other. A lot of times it's a low density residential or a medium density residential, and it's an agricultural zoning. So the land use is okay, but then you have to change the zoning to match the land use. I typically will only work for the 99% of the properties that we work on are stuff that I've looked at the future land use, and the future land use is what we want to do, and then we go make the zoning match the future land use.
So it's harder to change future land use than it is the zoning?
Well, you just have to, in Florida, you have to do that first, because the county or the city has to send it up to Tallahassee, our state capital, and an agency looks at it. They have 30 days to approve it. But that process, most local governments in Central Florida anyway, will not let you do the zoning coterminously at the same time as doing the future land use, so that you have to have that letter back from the state, goes back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, the County Commission or City Commission, and then you can do your zoning. So it just adds 3 to 6 months here, 3 to 6 months, or maybe a little bit longer onto the overall process if you have to change the future.
So the future land use, if it's already designated for whatever, single families, smaller single families, or whatever you're trying, when you're wanting to put tiny houses in, what future land use are you looking for?
Usually a medium density type thing. Our neighborhoods are 10 units. We can get 10 units per acre. A lot of the land that we're looking at is low, what they call low intensity. And again, it depends. We have Osceola County, which is down by Disney, has 3 to 8 units in their low. Most everybody is 4 units as a maximum in low density future land use. The other thing you could look for is mobile home parks or RV parks
that are already existing or already zoned for that, or future land use for that.
Right. An old mobile home park is a good site to have, to find.
Right.
Is because
does it have to be does it have to be a mobile home? Does it have to be a mobile home park that's already existing? Or what if the future land use? I mean, I guess people don't, zoning departments really don't want any more mobile home parks in really. But is there an instance where the future land use does, or the zoning does allow for a new mobile home or an RV park to be put in?
Here it's more rare, but there's existing zoning for existing properties, and a lot of times they'll let you convert the multifamily. So
Okay.
if you have existing RV or mobile homes, and sometimes you can get away with changing a commercial or industrial use. We're getting ready to change a commercial use to multifamily. And then there's a thing called a PUD or PD, which is a planned unit development or plan development, which allows us to go in and do we call it contract zoning. But what happens is in a PUD, there's usually greater open space requirements and heavier landscaping and design criteria and elements that the county wants to see. So the county has a tendency to say, if you go to PD or PUD, we could maybe do this a lot easier. And then, so that we'll end up probably on almost all our projects doing a PUD or PD.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So to recap here, guys, medium density is what you're looking for, which in most areas, or at least areas around here, is about 10 units per acre, or an existing RV or mobile home park that has that's there, or if the possibility, very rare, but possibility of already having it zoned for a mobile home park or an RV park, but none was ever put in there. So those are some good starting points for searching for land. So you went to due diligence immediately. I had it later on in the slide, but I dropped down here to this sources of information. When you're doing your due diligence, I've always been able to get a lot of traction out of the property tax assessor office. You get a lot of information about the property and the other property around it. The GIS is the map that they use, and usually it's on your property assessor's website. Title companies, building and zoning, the Department of Future Land Use, and like Scott said, the city or county commissioners, when they were getting ready for election, it wasn't a good time. But also, if the county or city commissioners are interested in some higher density housing or affordable housing or attainable housing, that might be a good source of information. Instead of going from the bottom up, you could kind of go from the top down, and they can say, hey, building and zoning and future land use, we want to allow some tiny houses in this PUD, and so we want you to figure it out. And that's what's happening in some of the places in California, where the cities and counties are saying, hey, we have to have some accessory dwelling units, and so we want to allow tiny houses on wheels as ADUs. So you guys in the building and zoning department figure it out. And they have to figure it out because it's mandated from the top down. So you got anything more on or any other sources of information?
Yeah, where you have building and zoning, I would add planning and zoning. If anybody's taking notes, I would say planning and zoning. Typically, the planning and zoning and building departments are totally separate.
So building department and planning and zoning department, yeah. Building is for the building itself. What's a tiny house? Can you have a tiny house on wheels? How's it constructed? The zoning department is telling you what you can put on the property, how many units, like the 10, it's zoned for medium density, and it tells you your building restriction lines and that kind of stuff from your zoning department.
And we're getting ready. We're going to go lobby all of our county commissioners. And we're going to start with the chairman in Volusia County. This is all in Volusia County, which is where Daytona is. We're going to lobby our commissioners with a local attorney who knows them all. And what we're going to do is go in and just kind of talk concept with them about the tiny houses and the attainable houses, because everybody's talking about affordable housing, or we're now calling it attainable rather than, because there's like a stigmatism with the word affordable, but everybody needs affordable housing. And what we're going to do is we're going to spoon feed it to them to make it sound like it was their idea.
You know how to talk politics, don't you?
Well, it's right now in Central Florida, just in 4 counties in Central Florida, they say that we need 192,000, 192,000, call it 200,000 units of affordable housing, and nobody's doing it. So it's really easy. It's really easy to pick on the commissioners, especially pick on the old commissioners if there's a new commissioner. You can say, so you can say, well, Barbara was a commissioner in this district, and while she talked a good game, she never approved anything for affordable housing. We have to have a change with that. You guys put your staff on task to go ahead and create this affordable housing plan, which they did an incredible job on. It's up to you now to promulgate that, and let's get some affordable housing units in Volusia County. And so we kind of go in with that sort of an attitude, like, of course you're going to approve this, right? And no, we're not going to. We don't want affordable housing in this county.
Yeah, so, right. Yeah, they can't say that.
And then once you get them on your side, then when you go to them later, a few months later with the deal, they know who you are, and they're going to be more apt to say yes.
So when you're doing your due diligence, you're looking for an opportunities, and they call it an opportunities and constraint analysis. And I have an example of one that we'll go to here in a minute. But basically, can you define what an opportunity and constraint analysis is, Scott?
Yeah, we look at that as what can we do with the property? And you have to, some of the constraint things are, do you have wetlands? What's the access? Do you have to, in Florida, in order to have, let's say if I'm behind something, I got to have a minimum of 50 feet in order to have access. So if I've got a 30-foot easement that leads to the property, I may not be able to do anything because there's a constraint that I have to have a minimum of 50 foot of access. If I'm doing 10 units per acre, I'm not going to be able to do it on well and septic. And so with the well and septic, I'm going to have the public utilities. So those are the opportunities here would be, let's say, to take a 5-acre industrial piece where there's nobody around, that maybe fronts on a halfway main road. It's got utilities there. It may even have some existing stormwater drainage on it, et cetera. And there's nobody that's going to come and bitch about the rezoning for it. And it may be on also a public bus line. So all of a sudden you've got a lot of opportunity there, and there's no wetlands, et cetera. So there's very few constraints on a property like that. So those are the kind of things that we would look at in terms of opportunities and constraints. We don't really look at them as opportunities and constraints. We look at them as, what are the advantages of this site, and what's here that I can actually build on it. Like taking an old RV park that's really, let's say, nasty, and you're going to change it into something that's really special. You have a better story to tell on something like that. There's a lot, and it already has
some of the infrastructure, maybe some roads, maybe some water, some sewer, might have some electric poles, or an existing RV park or a campground might have that, or a mobile home park. Yeah, and so in the when you're talking about a piece of property, if it has let's say a water line and a sewer line running in front of it, when you call them up, that's a pretty good deal. That means that you don't have to extend the water line off there. If it has a driveway or two driveways already, entryways already into the property, that might be an advantage. If the property's cleared, you wouldn't have to clear the property, you know. So those are some kinds of things that you want to look at. The problems and issues, the assets or the positives with it, the utilities we talked about, the liens, encumbrances, items that might need mitigation. Like Scott said, if there's a 30-foot wide easement into the property, you might be able to get another 20 feet. You might have to pay some money for it, but it's still, you still might be able to make the property work if the property owner that has the 30-foot easement going across his property is willing to give you or sell you another 20 feet to make it that. So let me see if I can go to this.
While you're doing that, let me give you an example. I have a friend that has an existing mobile home park that's 34 units. We're trying to change it into 67 units of RV. So there's an issue with the access. So we're going to the neighbor next door, and he has frontage on the main road. Our property doesn't have frontage on the main road. So we're trying to get 100 feet from him. And we told him we'll build an entrance down to our site and that he can use that to then further develop his site later. So he thought that was a pretty cool idea. So we're getting it far enough to get down. And then the other thing we needed was, funny enough, that we had to have in this particular county 8 acres in order to do the deal. We had 7.2 acres on ours. And they said, we could probably let it go, but there's a requirement that we can't and will not bend, which is this 8 acres. So if we pick up this 100 feet from this guy, we'll be able to get up to about 8.1 acres. And not only does it solves the access issue, which makes it much better, but it solves the constraint of the 7 versus 8 acres.
Okay, is that a 10 unit per acre parcel?
It's actually going to be more because it's RVs. They're a little bit.
Oh, okay, cool.
Smaller.
So with 8 acres, you're talking maybe 80 to 100 units at RV sites that might be put on there. Good job. This is all good stuff. So here's an opportunities and constraints analysis, just to go through real quick. The climate, what are the opportunities, what are the constraints, the geology, the topo, the soils. You can Google opportunities and constraint analysis, and you can get a lot of them online. This is the property and where they're talking about developing around this lake, the hydrology, the biological resources, forest resources, visual resources. This will all be on the back office, guys. So when traffic and circulation, cultural resources, noise, land use and zoning, electrical, public services. So it's a pretty comprehensive opportunities and constraints. Wastewater treatment. They also have recreation because they have this lake here. And then they have some campgrounds. And then they have some samples of some other camps that they call out and spell out in here. So just for those of you that are interested in this, that's a really good thing to peruse through, so you know what opportunities and constraints looks like, and then you can go on from there. Where was I? We were on due diligence. Yeah. Scott, now that we've talked about due diligence, can we do the potential red flags, and then I'll go back up and we'll talk about the governmental things for a minute?
Sure. The potential red flags are zoning issues. The particular piece that we were looking at has 2 neighborhoods that are very close to it, right around it, that are, the neighbors are very well organized. So that usually throws up a red flag to us and saying that that when the people are that organized, they're going to have a lot of NIMBY stuff. I did a deal about a year and a half ago in Titusville, Florida, It's over by the Space Coast. And I actually had people in the audience that had little signs up that said, apartment developer, go home. So actual signs like on survey stakes. It was unbelievable. So some of the other red flags that you would have is wetlands in the middle of a property. It's probably a good idea to have, in Florida anyway, somebody who knows a little bit about the environment. I call my environmental guy, and he can look at an aerial and say, you got a big wetland over here. And what he does is he'll put a Sharpie line around the wetland, and then all he's done is spent 10 minutes looking at an aerial, and he can pretty much tell. Some areas it's obvious, like if you're on a 60-degree slope. A lot of these California houses are on slopes, or North Carolina where you're building in the mountains. You have to be, obviously, some of the constraint or red flags there is just what we call topography. Code enforcement issues. A lot of the people have, like especially the more urban lots, don't cut the grass. So the city comes in or the county comes in and cuts the grass. They end up with code enforcement liens. That's an easy phone call. We always do that. The wet areas we talked about, endangered species here. Most everybody knows anything about developing in Central Florida. In Volusia County, we have scrub jays. In Polk County, down by Disney, they have the blue-tailed skink. What's interesting about the blue-tailed skink is you can only do the study basically from, fast answer is March 15th to May 15th. So if you go putting a piece of property under contract in June and nobody's done the skink study, you're not doing the skink study until next March, which means you're not going to spend a whole lot of money until you've had the skink study done, because the skinks can be really expensive. Same thing with turtles. Throughout Florida, we have gopher tortoises. The relocation costs on a gopher tortoise used to be $3 or $4 grand, so it wasn't too bad. Now they're up to 10,000 plus. That's just for the recipient site, 5 to 10,000 for the recipient site. Plus somebody's got to pick it up and move it. And then you may be required to put another couple grand in for perpetual maintenance. So an eagle in Florida, for example, there's certain criteria of when you can develop. And then you have urban eagles and rural eagles. The urban eagle is 750-foot radius. The urban eagle or rural eagle is a 1,500-foot radius, which is like 40
You develop
acres.
within that radius? Is that what it means?
You can't develop. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And just so I know a guy, he buys raw land just to relocate gopher turtles. You have to have a 2-foot-high fence around the property, and he makes very good money on raw land just relocating gopher turtles. So, a sidebar there for anybody that might be interested.
my
We already
environmental
talked.
consultant is doing that too, and you can get about 2 turtles per acre, by the way, just so you know.
So if you can get land cheap somewhere that's not developed, and you could really make out well. We talked about political climate. What's a CCR?
If you're in any kind of, let's say, a master plan community, they'll have the CCRs, which are covenants, conditions, and restrictions about what can be developed on the site. And sometimes there's architectural control, and sometimes there's minimum unit sizes, et cetera. Most vacant land that is not in any kind of a master plan community will not be subject to CCRs. So the CCRs are only going to come in if you're in, let's say you've got a giant community, like 5,000 acre community, there may be CCRs that'll apply to everything that's futurely developed in that area. So you have to be a little careful of that. Those are the big master plan communities that you see, like World Golf in St. Augustine, for example.
So we already, you kind of already answered what are the workarounds. A lot of it, you pay some money and have somebody move a turtle, or you plant a tree or several trees someplace, to replace the ones you're going to cut down. In the political climate, you just wait until the new guys come into office and do it there. So The code enforcement liens, the challenge, and I know that in some counties, I know in my county, you have to pay $35 to get a list of the code enforcement liens, but they don't show up in the county clerk's office. You actually have to go to the code enforcement office to find those liens, and they can be pretty pricey. Especially if you're going in and buying an existing RV park or mobile home park, there could be some, depending upon what the owner before that did, if they haven't really taken care of the place, there could be some very high code enforcement liens on there. But the workaround a lot of times on those is to go to the code enforcement office and say, you got $100,000 worth of liens on here. And obviously your cost wasn't that much to mow the grass. Is there a chance that once we buy this property, clean it up and everything, that we could mitigate that a little bit? And they'll either tell you yes or no, or I can't tell you. And so that'll tell you pretty much whether you want to invest in that property or not.
The main thing on those, by the way, too, is if they can't tell you, you got to get the process. Seminole County, where I live, for example, the codes is handled by the sheriff. And then they pretty much, county commission will direct the commissioner whose district that is, in essence, to sort of make the decision on whether or not they want to allow any mitigation of the fees.
All right. What's a phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental study, and when do you need one?
If you're going to finance anything through any type of bank or formal type financing, you're going to have a minimum of a phase 1. And a phase 1 is in what they call an environmental or level 1 to audit, where somebody's going to go out and look and see what's happened historically on the property. And then they're going to do a physical review of the property to make sure there's no 55-gallon drums out there filled with, chemicals from the plant that's 5 miles away that kept doing it. We have a lot of, in Florida, a lot of the old citrus groves had an area where there would be like a maintenance shed for the trucks. So they bring the tractors in and they undo the oil plug, and the oil would go straight into the sand. And then they put the plug back in, put 5 quarts of oil in, and off they go with the tractor. Well, you do that for 20 years, you got an area that has an environmental condition. They also had arsenic in cattle dipping station areas where they would walk the cattle through like a bathtub, if you will, sort of, that had arsenic in it. So those areas, anytime we have an old grove, they're going to look for arsenic in for the area where they may have dumped the oil. And then in those areas, then you're going to have to mitigate that. So we used to have an area where they could pick up the dirt and send it to a company that would incinerate it. And that solved a lot of that. But they're going to go through and look and see if there were any known hazardous conditions anywhere near the property. And there's a federal list. I'm paying right now $3,800 for one that's on 32 acres.
For a phase 1?
For a phase 1. And if it shows up that there's items of interest like the 55-gallon drums and those kind of things, then you're going to have to go into a phase 2, and those costs can go anywhere from $5,000 to millions of dollars depending on what's underneath it. In downtown Orlando, the Orlando Sentinel building dumped chemicals in the ground for, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years, or however long it's been. And I mean, it's millions of dollars to clean that up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know of one in Sanford, dry cleaner, that kept throwing the chemicals out the back door. And there was the cleanup on that was $2 million. And they just have a machine that just sits there and it just pumps, for 4 years or whatever it takes to clean up the groundwater in that area. They do a survey, they see a plume of where this has gone under neighboring properties, and you just basically have to pay to have that cleaned up. So just be careful of.
There's a couple things you can do let me cut you off real quick. As a developer on the sites, number one is most places have historical aerials. So in Seminole County, I can go back to 1942 on aerials. So if it's vacant now, it may have been vacant all the way back to 1942. You can see if they grew orange trees on it or had cattle on it or whatever, and in most of those instances. And then, so that's usually helpful. The other thing is you can do, either do it yourself or hire somebody to go through your property and look for the 55-gallon drums and those things that may be a problem, and have those not be there when your people go out to do the report.
And if you are buying a property that was an old gas station, filling station, or something like that, you really could be in for, because those underground tanks at times would leak, and you really could be in for at least a phase 1 and probably a phase 2 on one of those properties. So
the problem is once you bought it, you've inherited the issue. So let's say Robin had an old gas station and he knew the tanks were leaking, and then he sold it to me, and I came in and I now own it, and I had phase 1 done, and they said, oh, you got a problem, and then they do the phase 2. It's now my problem. It's not Robin's problem.
Yeah, and so if somebody wants to give you a piece of property, be suspicious. All right. So we've kind of gone through those. How are we doing time-wise? Oh, we're just about out of time. Can we quickly go through some of this, and we might revisit it next time, guys?
Yeah, so once you have your contract done, then most local governments have a pre-application process, which is anywhere from free up to $150 or a nominal fee. And we do a preliminary sketch. It doesn't have to be fancy. I've done a lot of them on Excel. And it's just to kind of show what you're looking for. Let's say you're going to have one entrance and you're going to have a little clubhouse building over here. In our case, we're putting the tiny houses around the circle, or an oblong, if you will, with a central area that's going to have fire pits and barbecue grills and pavilions and walkways and all that kind of stuff. So we draw that up very informally, just kind of little boxes where the houses are going to be, and kind of a box where the parking lot is, and box, entrance out, one entrance or two entrances or whatever it's going to be. And then we go in and talk to the city or county, and they'll typically bring all the rest of their staff people in, and they give you an idea. The fire department will come in and say, well, you got to make sure the houses are 10 feet or 15 feet or whatever it is apart. They'll tell you at that meeting, oh, you're going to have to get a permit from the state because you're going out onto a state road. You have to have what they call a driveway permit from DOT, or you don't have to. We're doing one right now that we had to have the entrance had to be at least 300 feet away from an existing road. Well, our frontage was 750 feet, which is forcing us to put the driveway entrance onto the road in the middle of the property, so that we met that 300-foot deal. They'll talk about whether or not you need to do a PD or not, what we talked about earlier. And in the PD, they'll say, go to this part of it. Florida has a thing called MuniCode, MUNICODE. You can go to municode.com and look up just about everybody's land development regulations. And in there, they'll have PD, and then you'll see that there's 35% open space and yada, yada. It'll give you all the stuff that you need to do there. So we usually do that. And then after that, we'll go back and then we do our real concept sketch. So I'm doing one right now that we're doing a concept plan on mixed use deal that I'm doing in Deltona. And so, in fact, I just talked to my engineer today about it. And so that's a more formal drawing. And then that's what we're going to use to do our rezoning. In this particular case, I had to have a traffic study. So my traffic engineer just sent me the methodology agreement today. And so that came out of the pre-app meeting, said you're going to have a traffic study. So
All right, we're gonna have
that's
to we're gonna have to end it there, guys. But give me some feedback, you guys that are on this. Are we dumbing it down enough for you? Is this way over your head? Can you go back and revisit these things and kind of understand what we're doing? Either put something in the comment box or raise your hand. But we're really interested in getting some feedback from you guys that that once you're done. I mean, we'll go through it this month and next month and a little bit into February. By then, we hope that you guys have enough knowledge to go out there and actually do a development, a tiny house development on your own. So any feelings one way or the other? Are we getting any comments, Leanne?
Yes, and I have a question. Well, Nancy has a question that I will ask, and then I'll read the comments. But Nancy wants to know, can you get a land inspection to limit your liability?
I'm not sure I understand the question too much in that there's a whole, if you look at that due diligence list that Robin has, and I can send one to Leanne too, that we could post in terms of that. But typically, you know what you want to do with the property. You're either going to do tiny houses on wheels, or you're going to do an RV park, with tiny houses in it, or you're going to do like we're doing, which is the circle neighborhood thing. So you're going to have an idea what you want to do. The county is usually really good. The planning and zoning staff is usually really good about saying, yeah, that's something we could look at, or you have no chance in hell of ever getting that approved here. But most of the time, they're going to require you to do a pre-app because they want to see what the real plan is. So that's when you do this kind of rough sketch and you bring it in and say, here's what we think we'd like to do. And in my case, I got 22 houses around a circle or around an oblong because it's longer and skinny. And then I've got a little clubhouse over to the side. I've got parking that's external to the thing, so there's no internal streets. And I've got one driveway cut onto a main road, et cetera. I've got city water and sewer, so there's not an issue there. So I drew that, we drew that up and we went and talked to them, and then we've had, subsequent meetings after that. But that's when they told us, what the things that they wanted to see and what we could do and couldn't do.
So if you hire somebody to come out and look at it, he may or may not, it's really the final say is up to the planning and zoning, or the other departments that are there, if you're talking about, water and sewer, or you're talking about a driveway. So you can hire, people, an attorney or somebody that's familiar with development in that area to help you out if you're not. But what Scott's saying is you kind of have a pretty good idea what you want. Just go to the planning and zoning department and say, hey, what do you think about this? And they'll tell you.
Right. I was
The
thinking
other thing
kind of
is
with a home inspection, and you have somebody come out and inspect the place to make sure that, that it's safe and good for your family. Can you have somebody come out and check for 55-gallon drums that look suspect in turtles?
the turtles is going to be an environmental consultant. What we would typically do is, pay $1,000 or a couple $1,000, depending on the size of the property, for him to go through and do a very, very preliminary sketch. There's certain soil types that are conducive to turtles. They like high sandy soil. So if there's a lot of wet areas and it's really low land, you're not going to have turtles. So there's different things that are endemic to your area. A good idea would be to chat with a local civil engineer, because most of the time, most of the people hire civil engineers to run their deals. I like using land planners, and now I'm experienced enough to do it myself. But typically, I'll sit down with a civil engineer to kind of go through some of the constraints, and then I have a pretty close environmental consultant now. I don't do anything without him taking a look.
Well, thank you.
because
I was hoping.
they'll be able to tell you just by looking at the site and driving around it, and they'll trudge through it. So I mean, maybe you might be able to get as low as $500 for them to give a quick assessment of your site. Aerially, on the aerial with the Sharpie, like I mentioned, they're going to be able to draw that. And depending on where you are, you have a 25 to 75 foot setback away from that wetland area. And you typically want to put your retention, which we have to have in Florida on all our sites anyway, down by that because it's less fill required and you can pull some dirt out of there. So the engineer can tell you that real quickly. I just had a concept plan done. We're doing a mixed use deal with some apartments and some industrial and some retail. And we're having the apartment guy combine some of our land from the industrial to do retention for the entire project. So he just sent me the concept site plan that incorporates that. So we have to go through and make sure that it's relatively close. So I'm meeting my civil engineer on Friday to kind of go through that. I sent him the plan, but we're going to go through it real fast to see that we're close on the retention. Because generally we use 15% of the site. If it's a high and dry site, generally in the 15% range is what you're going to need for retention. And if it's a lower site, then you're going to need more area than 15%. You may go to 18 to 20%. So if I'm looking at, and a number that everybody needs to know is 43,560. So 43,
What is that?
56,
1 acre.
43,560.
All right.
Square
Who
feet
said
in
that?
an acre.
Catherine.
All right. You
So
know how I
use
remember.
mentally.
You know
it's
how I
just a
remember
thing.
that one, Scott?
No,
How do you remember that one? What's 4 plus 3?
7.
What's 5? 5 plus 7? No, 43,500.
60,
What is it? 43,560.
560,
So what's 5 plus 6?
11.
711.
Anyway, I use mentally 32,000 feet per acre. 32 to 33,000 feet per acre is the developable part of the land in my head. Because when you have roadways, et cetera, you have an entranceway, you may have a little park area, et cetera, all that comes off the usable. So you end up with, so when people say, well, I have a 10,000 foot lot, I want to put 5 of those on there, 5 times 10,000 is 50,000. It doesn't fit on 43,560. And I can't believe it. We went to the city of DeLand, and the city was telling us that we had to have 11,700 square foot lots. And they said, you can't put more than 7 of those on there. Well, that was 80,000 square feet. And we were like, wait a minute, I can't even get 3 of those on, 30. So you can't tell me that I could do, 7 of these times 15 acres, 105 units. I can't even get 3 times the 15. I can't even get 45 units. They were saying, and the public was going nuts because they said we could put 105 houses there. I said, wait a minute, it's physically impossible. So.
You have a
Anyway.
question, Catherine?
Well, thank you, Scott, so much for what you're sharing. And I was just curious, from my real estate background and what I have done my research in citrus, like Citrus Springs, for instance, has a PUD, and it's like set in stone. So they have their multifamily lands, they have your single family, commercial, and there is no changing that. Have you come or found where you've actually been able to change what an existing PUD is? Or
No,
is
that's an example. That's a perfect example of your CCRs. So Citrus Springs is a big master plan community, kind of like a Deltona or a Cape Coral, or if you're familiar with Palm Bay, Flagler, Palm Coast, there's a bunch of them, Point Siena down by Disney, Deltona. There's a bunch of them, Citrus Springs, and you can't even put a manufactured house in Citrus Springs.
Exactly.
I've done several lots in Citrus Springs.
Well, I was curious because you're using the PUD word as some, land. So I just wanted to know, was just curious about, so PUD does change from county to county then?
Well, yes. But what you might want to do is look in Denellen or just outside the city the Citrus Springs actually boundaries, because there's plenty of land right outside of it, and that
Yes,
may
sir.
be a good area. The other thing is you have to be a little careful, I think, in terms of your marketability of a tiny house in that neighborhood, in that area, a tiny house community. You may want to get more urbanized.
I'm sorry, I'm actually wasn't planning on putting something there. I was just from my experience with real estate, the PUD designation, the way you described it was seemingly a little different than what I know from that specific master plan. So I just was wanting to clarify that in general.
Yeah, I would call Citrus Springs, for example, a master plan community.
Right.
You get into, like, if you go down to Sarasota, you've heard of Lakewood Ranch or Babcock Ranch, and over in Wesley Chapel, there's a big one right off 2,500 acre master plan community. Those are the kind of places you're probably not going to be able to
Stay away from,
change
okay.
anything in, because now they may have some land that they put that would be multifamily in there, that you may be able to
True.
convert that multifamily into a tiny home community, let's say.
Okay, thank you so much.
And I think what Scott was talking about, and when he's talking about a PUD or a PD, and that the there is no PUD designation on this property, but if you go to your zoning department and say, you know, how about if I made this into a PUD, and this is, and I'll have my 35% of clear area and everything, like, they might say, yeah, you can go ahead and put your tiny house community in there. Isn't that what you were trying to? It wasn't an existing PUD, but it was land that you would talk to the county about making it into a PUD.
Oh, you're talking about turning it into a PUD.
Turning it
okay.
into a PUD, because what happens is they have a lot of flexibility. So let's say the building department, you may be in, let's say, Daytona Beach, the city limits, and their minimum house size is 800 square feet. So they're not going to bend on that. But if you do a PD, you may be able to come in and do a 500 square foot or 400 or 300 square foot house, or, you know, a combination of 300, 400, and 500 or whatever, because you're doing a PUD and you're incorporating all these other aspects of the development, extra landscaping, open space, and all these other things that gives them more flexibility.
Thank you so much for explaining that.
Cool. So,
All right.
Tara, did I say that right? All right. Tara says, so much information, new info, but you are explaining well. And Ron, who's been a loyal attendee from the beginning, it's a fire hose, but good. And Catherine, great job. Asa Feinstein said, thought it was great. Nancy says, valuable information and a lot I wouldn't have thought of. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And Andy, I'm following and very interested, would like to access past videos outside of Facebook.
If anybody's interested too, you can email me and I'll be happy to try to answer your questions. And it's sbanta, B-A-N-T-A, at dqtn.org. S
Can
like
we put
Scott,
that in the
Banta.
chat?
You see my last name there? sbanta at dqtn, which is our acronym for DreamQuest Tiny Neighborhoods.org.
Can you put that in the chat, Leanne?
Yes, say it one more time, sbanta at
DQTN. Yeah, DreamQuest Tiny Neighborhoods, dqtn.org.
org. Okay, there we go. So yes, Andy,
If you,
sorry, go ahead.
Let me just toss one other thing in. If you go back to I think it was the first or second meeting that we had, if you go back, you can see some examples of the concept or preliminary site plans. So you can see that they're not real fancy. And so that would be something that, as you're, you know, sitting and doing the napkin sketch at the bar when you're talking to some other friends and you're saying, well, here's what we want to do. That's almost good enough, is what we're talking about on the preliminary plan. So I do it in Excel. And then my partner, Eric, he actually does our little site plans, the concept things. He does it in some little program that he has that does a drawing thing. But so I mean, this isn't fancy. We're not scaling it or anything. So I mean, you,
They
you
just
can
need a
get somebody
general
to do that
idea of
off
what
the
to
internet
do.
for a couple $100. Yeah.
All right. Well, to answer your question, Andy, those are in the member portal. If you click on the green button that says video library, Jordan has them separated by the days. So like Monday, builder days, blah, blah, blah. Ron is pulling out good pieces for my purposes. Thank you. And David Rotter, I know that you are building a village in Texas, I believe. I turned in late, but are there any national standards on septic to water separation? My county is saying only 3 feet seems close. I'm installing septic lines this month.
We generally find, and again, I'm not totally familiar with, but most water and most wells and septics are governed by the Department of Health rather than anybody else. So I would suggest that you would go down here. We have to have a 75-foot separation between the well and the septic tank minimum. So,
Yeah.
And then it gets a little confusing when you start getting lots close together that, you know, you got the separation between 2 septic tanks and 2 wells. And, you know, so you're going to have generally a little wider lot or deeper anyway, in order to fit those in.
If I
would
could
go down to your,
clarify, I'm sorry.
excuse me?
Yeah, if I could clarify that, yeah, I'm mainly talking about the lines underground between the tiny homes. I know the water and septic system itself, like where the well is and the septic, that's got to be like 150 feet away here. But
Okay.
as far as the lateral lines in the ground, he's saying only 3 feet, but it just seems like it's too close. And
No,
I just didn't know if there's state regulation or national regulation.
I believe the 3 feet that he's talking about is cover. So they have to be a minimum of 36 inches underneath the surface of the ground when
Well,
you're running the line.
I think, let me jump in on that one there. I think, well, let's go to water lines. I know in our area, they have to have a foot of cover, but the separation between the sewer lines and the water lines have to be at least 3 feet. And maybe that's what you're talking about, David.
Yes, that's exactly
Gotcha.
what I'm talking about. Ours is 1 foot in depth and 3 feet apart. If they cross,
Good.
It has to be a jacket of another size
Sleeved.
pipe.
It has to be sleeved.
Basically. Yeah,
Yeah.
to go 3 feet on each side.
Yeah,
Yep.
a lot of times that sleeving for the crossing of the lines has to be in metal. Most of the time. Here, it has to be in metal.
Yeah, and electric can run with the water or the septic is what I'm told. But I'm running it
Well,
with the water.
With the
We
electric,
usually here try to put them on different sides of the street. So typically you'd have water on one side and your sanitary on the other side.
yeah, but I think he's talking about, you know, the lots and they're pretty close together.
Right.
The only thing about the electric line, David, is the depth on the, if it's in conduit is 18 inches. And if it's not in conduit, if you're using UF cable, it needs to be 24 inches deep.
I'm in conduit and going 24 inches.
Okay, well then you're fine.
Yeah, I'm trying to step everything up a little bit more. Like my roadway for fire, they said it had to be 20-foot wide roadway. I'm going 25-foot roadway, things like that. Just trying to step it up, you know, a kind of an Nancy plus kind of thing, or no, plus for my construction.
We like to do that too, because I find sometimes when you get a little over standard, you have a lot less maintenance. And in the longer run, if you're there for a while, you'll end up saving a lot of money.
Yeah, I have a lot of trees to trim up above. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that helps.
Are you doing on wheels or foundations?
All on wheels. I'm starting out with 12 spots right now. And I learned, it's kind of interesting. I don't know how it goes in other parts of the country, but I'm having to do a water well, and I can only serve up to 25 people or up to 12 spots off of one well. Otherwise, if I go bigger, well, I mean, I can go bigger, but then I become a public water utility if I go more than that. But they said you can do another well on the property and serve another 12 if you want later on. Plus, it was way cheaper to do it in sets of 12 with the septic size that way too. So I'm doing
Well,
first
with
phase
your-
of 12.
With your public well, I think the setbacks are 100 feet on that, not 75. You said yours was 150 in your area?
Just between the two units, between where the septic and my septic is, it's downhill. It's about actually 600 feet away from where my well is, or where
Yeah.
my well's going.
And they have to put in what's called a grout well, where the bottom has to be grouted and the top has to be grouted, and you have to have a 6-foot concrete pad right at the top of your well. And, you know, because I was considering doing that, they have the same rules here. But to go from a public, from a private to a public, it's not that big of a jump. And you can, I mean, we have an RV park that has 83 units in it, and we only have one well. And all we have to, once you get up to that point, you can pay, you just basically have to pay a company. We use Protec to come out and make sure that the chemicals are right, you know, the chlorine and lye and all the stuff they put in there. So it's just an expense you roll into it rather than drilling another well. You just basically take that, what we have is a 6-inch well. You just take that 6-inch well, put a big 25,000 gallon holding tank on it, and then have a company come out and do that, you know, every I think it's a month, every month to make sure that it's potable water.
Yeah, they said I
That's
had
a
to do
perfect
daily testing if I go higher than that.
Daily?
Daily testing. Yeah.
Testing.
This is a great
Yeah.
example of how different areas have different regulations. Like Ron or David is obviously familiar with what's going on with his compared to what we're doing. We're doing everything with, you know, public water and sewer, and Robin has, you know, a different thing with a public well. So it's really kind of interesting. So as you're going to marry those requirements to your individual site and your individual government jurisdiction.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have a sewage treatment plant, our own sewage treatment plant for the park also. So there's no public water or public sewer, and that has to be tested every so often too. I don't remember what the number is on that, but yeah, if you go public water and sewer, it's a whole lot easier. However, it's pretty expensive. Tap fees can really get up there. But if you can,
Yeah.
if you are in a rural area, the option is to go with, you know, well and a septic.
And the
Yeah, it's
septic
quite-
systems go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's quite expensive here, and luckily the septic people that are doing it are letting me run all my 4-inch lateral lines between the units because I have them spaced out so much. I've got about 800 linear feet just for feeding 12.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well,
Yeah, so
guys, we are.
That's another example of working with your contractors to, you know, a lot of people do that with the electric where they run the conduit and then let the electrician run it through the conduit. So you don't have to pay their prices for conduit, where you can get out there with a mini X and maybe dig your little trenches and dump your pipe in there. And then,
Yep.
you know, have somebody inspect it to make sure that it's okay.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Well, guys, this is all good stuff, and we're going to have to leave some more time for conversation, you know, because I like this part of the evening too. We're talking about different things, so we'll try to do that
Yeah.
next time. But Leanne, can you kind of bring us out of here?
We're out of here. Andy can get back to work, and we're gonna go eat dinner. No. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight for this. I mean, really, it's priceless information. I don't know where else you can get any of any of this. Anyway, tomorrow night is our inspector chat. We're gonna have our guys on. I don't know if we'll have topics or what, but you guys bring your questions because we like the interactive stuff. So whatever's been, on your mind, if you haven't called to ask me, you can tune in tomorrow night for our inspector chat. So with that, have a great evening. And again, we appreciate your time, Scott, Robin, and the education. You guys have a wonderful night and thank you so much.
All right, thanks,
Bye.
everybody.